There are three numeric value types, e.g., length, percentage, and number, that you might find yourself using in CSS, but for this lecture, we will consider length only. CSS has several different units for expressing a length. Many CSS properties take length values such as width, margin, padding, font size, and so on. Length is a number followed by a length unit such as 10 pixels, 2 em, and so on. Set different length values using pixels. A white space cannot appear between the number and the units. However, if the value is 0, the units can be omitted. For some CSS properties, negative lengths are allowed. There are two types of length units. The first is the absolute, and the second one is the relative. Absolute length. The absolute length units are fixed, and a length expressed in any of these will appear as exactly that size. Absolute length units are not recommended for use on screen because screen sizes vary so much. However, they can be used if the output medium is known, such as for print layout. We have several screen sizes for different devices. The size of the screen of a laptop differs from the size of the screen of a mobile devices. So, absolute length units are not recommended for use on screen because screen sizes vary. However, they can be used if the output medium is known. Like example, if you are intending to print out a copy of that document. Here are some examples of absolute length. Relative length units specify a length relative to another length property. Relative length units scales better between different rendering numbers. The benefits of using relative length is that with some careful planning, you can make it so that the size of a text or other element scales relative to everything else on the page. Some of the most useful units for web development are listed in the table below. The most common ones are the EM units, the RAM units, the viewport width units, the viewport height units. For the M units, the relative to the font size of the elements. The M unit is relative to the font size of the elements units. 2em means 2 times the size of the current font. The rem unit is relative to the font size of the root elements. The rem unit is relative to the font size of the root elements, that's the container elements. The viewport width is relative to 1% of the width of the viewport. The viewport height is relative to 1% of the height of the viewport. Percentage is also common and it is relative to the parent elements. In the example below, you will see how some relative and absolute length units behave. The first box has a width set in pixels, and it is an absolute unit. As an absolute unit, this width will remain the same no matter what else changes. This is the element we are using in this example. It is a div with a class of wrapper. So for the first box, we applied a width of 200 pixels. So this is what it will look like on a browser. This is the first box, this is the second box, and this is the third box. So I'm going to try to resize my screen size. Notice that nothing happened to the first box. If you change the width of your browser window, the size of the second box should change. To see this in action, you would have to try the example after opening it in its own browser tab. The third box uses units. These are relative to the font size. I've set a font size of 1M on the containing div, which has a class of wrapper. Change this value to 1.5M and you will see that the font size of all the elements increases, but only the last item will get wider as its width is relative to that font size. After following the instructions above, try playing with the values in other ways to see what you get.